What is it, Lookout?
I never saw anything like it. An enormous wall of water coming towards us.
In the early morning hours of New Year's Eve, Gene Hackman, Ernest Borgnine, Red Buttons, Carol Lindley, Roddy McDowell, Stella Stevens, Shelley Winters, Jack Albertson, Pamela Sue Martin, Arthur O'Connell, Eric Shea, and Leslie Nielsen were aboard the SS Poseidon when it was hit by a 90-foot tidal wave.
Oh, my God.
And capsized. The Poseidon Adventure. The most exciting escape adventure of our time.
Now follow me.
It took the lives of the 1,400 people on board and changed the lives of the few who would survive.
Climbing to another deck will kill you all. And sitting on our butts is not going to save us either. Don't look down.
Now there's a chance for me to do something that I know how to do. Please, but you gotta let me do.
You're going the wrong way, damn it!
Who do you think you are, God himself?
That's the way out.
The combined talents of 15 Academy Award winners bring you Irwin Allen's production of The Poseidon Adventure, a Ronald Neame film, coming from 20th Century Fox.
Hi, everybody, and welcome once again to GeekFest Rants. My name is Carlos Perron, and I have James joining me today. Say hi, James.
Hello, hello.
Well, today we are going to take a step back, as we've done in the past. We are going to explore a genre that we probably grew up on it, half watching it in the movie theater and half watching it as repeats on television endlessly.
The epic movie of the week.
Oh, yeah. Oh, my God. And back before cable, when CBS movie, Sunday night movie presents, that kind of stuff, they would show all these movies that now it's like, who cares? But what we're talking about is disaster films, especially the 70s disaster films, which... Now, granted, the 70s did not invent the disaster film. You can watch, hundreds of films, black and white, all kind of disaster-y kind of films. But there was something special about the 70s disaster film because not only were they huge spectacles of special effects, drama, melodrama, because it was so dramatic, and superstars of the time, it was almost like a formula where you gather together all these famous people and put them in danger and then see who survives at the end. Now, I don't remember exactly how many of them I saw in the theater because, 1970, I was born in 70, so yeah. I was very young, but most of these I've seen them hundreds of times on television, and I actually own a number of them. And we're going to kind of go in order here. So let's start with 1970, the granddaddy of the modern disaster films, if you want to call the 70s the modern disaster films, and that is Airport. Now, Airport is your traditional plane flying around in danger. The particular danger of this movie was a mad bomber, I believe. There was a guy who has a bomb. It was some kind of insurance scam where he was going to kill himself so his wife can get the insurance money. But in the process, he's going to blow up the entire airline, And as I mentioned earlier, famous people. You have Burt Lancaster,
who's huge, and he wasn't even. He's still huge in 1970. Dean Martin is the Rat Pack. I mean, this is these guys are big time.
Oh yeah, and like I said, Dean Martin. Now George Kennedy is in it. Now, what's important about George Kennedy is that he actually works his way through a lot of these airport films. He's like the ongoing. He's the wedge of Airport.
And George Kennedy is like a man's man. Like when he hits the screen, that's like, this guy means business. He's either a boss or like he's the leader of a crew or something, like a cop, So when he shows up, now we've got like, the tough guy. All right, how's he going to fix this problem?
Oh, yeah. And it's, again, if you watch it now, it kind of seems like a not a very creative gimmick, but if you think about the scenario they're in, the situation they're in, this is the movie where it's all based on. So, for example, if you're watching a comedy like Airplane, a lot of the gags from Airplane come from the airport movies, from this movie and its sequels. So it's kind of like interesting to see, in Airplane, you have Sonny Bono who's going to blow up the plane. Oh, no, wait, that came from Airport, the Mad Bomber who's going to blow up the plane. So it's kind of weird. And again, this stuff is on DVD and Blu-ray. I don't know if it's on Blu-ray, but it's definitely on DVD. And they used to play this stuff to death. I mean, back when I was young in New York, Channel 5, Channel 11, Sunday afternoons, or even Sunday nights when they, like I mentioned earlier, the Sunday night movie and that sort of thing, the movie of the week.
Yeah, I can imagine this started out, like I said, the epic movie of the week. There would be things like, I don't know, by the time we were watching them, it was probably the middle 70s when we picked up some of these.
Yeah.
Because, like I said, we were little kids. But they'd be on, you'd hear them, your parents would be watching, okay, you got to go to bed, it's a Sunday night, CBS, dun 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 dun, or something. And then eventually it became kind of like the late movie or something. Like there was always some kind of spectacle involved with it that for some reason, either I was almost not allowed to watch it, so if I got to watch it, it must have been a big deal. It's like watching the 10 Commandments or, stuff like that. So by the time this comes on, and now there's a series of them, it makes me, I think we talked about this back when the Planet of the Apes came on. They would have Ape Week. Like at a certain point, they would have, let's just say by the time Airport 77, or one of the later Airport movies come out, they would put 3 or 4 on in a particular, either a month or a week or something. They did it with the James Bond movie, so it became a big deal. It's like, now the next one's on. We got to watch this. And then eventually, like HBO would do the same thing. But with HBO, you could watch it, back to back to back in one day sometimes.
So if Airport kind of kicked off the whole trend, I guess, of these type of films in the 70s, we move forward a little bit to 1972 with one of my favorite ones, The Poseidon Adventure. Now, I can watch The Poseidon Adventure today and I would be just as enthralled in it and, amazed at the special effects and the performances. You have Gene Hackman and Ernest Borgnine, for Christ's sake. They are amazing in this film.
I love both of those guys. I especially love Gene Hackman. I have been trying to get Gene Hackman to participate in my real world every day. Every week I go up to my bosses, let's say, and I say, can we get Gene Hackman? How can we get Gene Hackman? Gene Hackman's got to be available. And of course, Gene Hackman's retired from movies.
He's retired. He doesn't want to do anything.
He paints. He probably doesn't want to get involved in any of this nonsense anymore. And in what I'm involved in my real life. But I try. I got to meet Gene Hackman. How can I meet Gene Hackman? Can we get Gene Hackman? And it all comes back for probably this. If not this, Popeye Doyle, and if not that, some of his later work. So some of his more modern stuff. And this movie was a big deal because the water.
Well, everything's upside down. It's amazing.
Yeah, but the cast in this, Roddy McDowall, we know him again for Planet of the Apes.
He's got a small part. About. Yeah.
Shelley Winters. Everybody knew who Shelley Winters was. And Jack Albertson from Chico and the Man. And I love Chico and the Man, so I knew him. It always kind of ties back into, did you see somebody on television? So we like John Travolta in Saturday Night Fever because he was Barbarino. And Jack Albertson's on Chico and the Man, so I must like him. And I even forgot to mention him when we were talking about Willy Wonka. That's how I knew that he was in it, but I never saw that movie back in that era.
You also have Red Buttons.
But let me just say, the whole reason this was, Irwin Allen was a television producer, creator, a guy, when it's almost like when they would mention his name, you knew you were getting a certain type of show. So in the TV world in the late 60s, you were getting a slightly campy, but, a science fiction like Lost in Space or The Land of the Giants, things like that. So when he ventured into the big screen, his movies were epic, but, they did have a little bit of cheese to them. You know what I'm saying? Like, if you're not careful, you could wind up saying, is this a low budget or is this huge? Now, in this case, this was huge. This was not a goof. He was trying to make a serious movie that picked up where Airport was more serious. Now, this one, like I said, was like epic.
Right, and this was one of his first tries at doing these type of big, like you said, epic adventure type of films when it comes to in the disaster genre. And like I said, it's huge. The special effects are great. I know they remade it many, many years later. I think Wolfgang Peterson did it, and it was okay, but I would say stick to the classic because it's just great.
Now, you previously mentioned Airplane, how that basically took the mantle of the airport movies and turned it into a whole comedy genre.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah.
the person most identified with the Airplane movies and then the Naked Gun and the stuff that came after is Leslie Nielsen. Well, Leslie Nielsen plays totally straight. His early work was
That's
he was
right,
a straight
the
actor.
captain.
He wasn't he's the captain of the Poseidon.
Uh-huh.
And of course there's always some sort of little intrigue, and they're trying to get the ship in, and like probably again some kind of insurance scam, or there's something, and then they retconned it that there was they were hauling some sort of plutonium or something. So it wound up.
Well,
I still don't care. You get to the point where Shelley Winters becomes the hero and then dies. I mean, if you're not crying at that point, or if you're not sad when she winds up passing away and Gene Hackman has to go back and tell Jack Albertson that Belle Rosen is dead. Oh, come on. That's heartbreaking. And then finally at the end with Gene Hackman himself, this is that.
Oh,
it's still pretty dramatic and serious, even though
Yes.
it comes across as a bit campy now, 40 years later.
right. And Gene Hackman plays he's like a preacher. So he's the guy
Yeah.
who's trying to get everybody to not give up and to go in because the ship is upside down, he's trying to convince everybody they got to go down to get to the top because everything's upside down. And there are people that just don't want to go his way. And, he just completely, has to get these people to go in the right direction, and they fighting the entire way, basically.
Yeah.
Well, up next we have Airport 75. Again, this is a sequel to the very successful Airport film, the original one. This one's 1975. What is the gimmick? Well, most of these movies have a gimmick. Even Poseidon Adventure, by the time you get to these movies, you see a kind of pattern forming, and that is you get to know all the individual stories of the passengers or the people that are stranded or whatever
they try to
it is.
they try to get you vested in the people, some of the crew, some of the maybe
there are some very nice people,
Yeah.
and some creeps, and
maybe there's a relationship between the captain and and one of the stewardesses. Maybe the guy in the tower has some story that's tied in because he used to fight in the war with the captain. There's always some kind of little thing,
right? And the question is, who will survive out of all these people you met? The ones you hate, are they going to live or are they going to die? The ones you like, are they going to live? It's that kind of formula, but you kind of go with it because it's fun to watch. Well, with Airport 1975, the story this time around is that the plane, it's not a mad bomber. This time around, the plane gets hit by a smaller plane.
And you know what? This is kind of like there were situations that big planes were winding up having near misses, and in some cases, sadly, back in the 70s, there were some big planes that had, a crash with a smaller plane. So it's kind of taking a bit of from the headlines type of situation and turning it into a more dramatic, soap opera-y kind of big screen epic.
Yeah. And this time around, we have Charlton Heston, Moses himself.
Yeah. Like I said with Gene Hackman, there are some of these guys, I just love these guys. And Charlton Heston, again, he's Moses. He's in Planet of the Apes. He's in this guy has a career that, Ben-Hur. We could make a Charlton Heston show. There's just so much going on. From the beginning of his career to the end, he was still pretty prolific. And so he really was somebody, when he's in a movie, it must be a good movie. That's all you have to say. If Charlton Heston's in it, it must be a big movie. So I hear that name, or my parents, say, oh, yeah, he's in it or something, or I see his face. I got to see it, Well,
the big set piece of this particular movie is that because of the crash, because of the small plane hitting the bigger plane, all of a sudden there's a huge hole in the cockpit. And what they have to do is they have to somehow, I believe, get another pilot. I think they have to fly another pilot and kind of dangle him from a rope to kind of get him to get into the jet, the 747, through that little tiny hole. And I think they have to try it a couple of times because they lose the
and
first
of course
pilot
somehow,
or something
and of
like
course,
that.
Of course they get Joe Petroni on the phone because, he knows this plane like nobody else does, and then they explain, well, if you get the guy in just on this angle and he comes in, we could probably bring it in safely, you might lose a few, there's always some sort of little thing, But again, this had a cast of thousands.
Well, the thing about it is also that Charlton Heston is a pilot, but the pilot of the plane gets blinded by the collision. So he's the guy who actually has to climb through the hole. I think he's the second one because the first one dies or whatever. But tell me about some of the other superstars in this, other than George Kennedy, because remember, George Kennedy has to be in these films.
Well, you said superstars, so I want to make sure you know Eric Estrada, a young, strapping Eric Estrada, has a part in it. The lovely Laurette Spang, who played in the original Battlestar Galactica, who was Cassiopeia. One of my favorites from My Three Sons is Beverly Garland, and she winds up marrying Steve Douglas in the later years. Mork's father-in-law, Conrad Janis, is in this. Norman Fell himself, who is Mr. Roper. And Jerry Stiller, who doesn't love Jerry Stiller? George Costanza's father. I mean, Larry Storch. You know Larry Storch, right, from F Troop?
Oh, Austin Stoker is in it. I want to see this movie again.
And Ken Sanson, who plays in the Winnie the Pooh movies in the later years. So all of my favorites are in it.
My God, every movie seems to have more, big shots. Well, I guess, I don't know, were they that big shot back then?
Well, they were kind of like a mid-level act. Jerry Stiller, Norman Fell had been in a lot, like Jerry Stiller was a big name. He was, he and his wife had the act, plus they had been in a bunch of big movies.
Okay.
Norman Fell had already been in The Graduate at that point, so, I mean, he'd been around. So a lot of these, and we're leaving out Myrna Loy, and we're leaving out some people who are huge. The trouble is, that's the thing. These movies wound up having so many people who either were up-and-comers or had already been somebody and were now elder statesmen in Hollywood.
There are no extras in these movies. They're just all stars.
Everybody was somebody, and that's what made them special. And I guess there was an element of like, they're making another movie. Get me in that movie. Call my agent. I want to get in that too. If he's in it, I can be in it, So... now this becomes big business now. This is big box office. This is before, this is still before Jaws, before Star Wars. This is now what they're trying to make. This is the popcorn movie of the time. And so,
this is like the comic, like today we have comic book movies. In the 70s, you had the disaster films. It was a surefire hits, automatic.
Now, as strange as it sounds, this is now when I start to see movies because it's hard to believe. I was probably around... 6 or something like that. But believe it or not, my parents must have either been weird, had a lot of faith in my maturity, or didn't want to hire a babysitter.
So I think it's all three of the above.
Because I can recall around this era having seen some of these movies. As strange as this again sounds, I saw Night of the Living Dead. I saw that in a drive-in theater with my parents. Obviously, that came out in 1968, so I didn't see it that year. But a few years later, they would re-release movies and stuff like that. But Earthquake was probably the first one I saw in the theater. And I probably guess my parents thought it was innocuous enough that you could take a kid to it. There's going to be, an earthquake and the buildings are going to collapse and probably I could handle this. You know what I'm saying? So that was a big deal for me. Now we're getting into my era of disaster movies. And again, who's in it? Charlton Heston. So,
coincidentally, not only is he in it, but it came out the same year as Airport 1975. And you can't have Charlton Heston if you don't have George Kennedy.
Exactly. And they both play different characters, but they're both there. But the beauty of this movie is, so now you've got Richard Roundtree, he's a big name from the 70s. You've got Lauren Green from Battlestar Galactica once again. Ava Gardner. Now, Ava Gardner is beautiful. She had been married to Frank Sinatra, among other people. At that point, she's a big name. So I can't really see, how did they get people in these movies? It's almost like people just lined up, big names just lined up. Walter Matthau.
Walter Matthau, for crying out loud.
Yeah.
That's insane.
I see young Victoria Principal. Okay, so you say, like I said, up-and-comers. They're going to, obviously, try to get in these movies. But these other names, we could go down and just George Murdoch, again, from Battlestar Galactica. He was in Star Trek V. He played God. He was in Barney Miller. So people know that, those names. And I just think this movie in particular felt bigger for some reason. And I don't know if it was because of the scope of it's L.A.
You're destroying L.A. You're actually destroying entire cities now.
I had never been on a plane at that point in my life. I certainly had never been on a boat like the Poseidon, but you'd been in cities at that point when you're a little kid, so you can relate. Oh my God, this is falling, or that's, or their house. There's the house is collapsing, and that just made me nuts every time I thought about it. It's like, where are we going to go if there's an earthquake? And my parents would be, we're in New Jersey. There's no earthquakes in New Jersey, which is actually a lie. But
there are earthquakes in Jersey. I remember them.
But at the time, it was good enough to calm me down.
The other thing about Earthquake is that it was written, the screenplay, by Mario Puzo, who is, the guy who wrote The Godfather. So there's some cachet on that movie.
Yeah, The Godfather 1 and 2 have come out, and two of the greatest movies ever made. And he's responsible for that screenplay in the book. So, hey, how could you go wrong?
Yeah, it's attracting, not only is it attracting, top-level actors, but now with top-level, very famous writers. Well, once again, same year, you got another monster hit disaster film, The Towering Inferno, which to me, it's probably one of the two best ones. I would say Poseidon Adventure and Towering Inferno are the best of all of those.
And this is a funny one because of so many different things. I think originally, if I'm not mistaken, they wanted Steve McQueen to play Paul Newman's part or something. Steve McQueen said, or something along the lines is, no, I want to play the fireman. I mean, people, the fireman's the hero, blah, blah, blah. Now, he doesn't show up till later on or something like that.
Right.
But I guess the thinking is people are going to remember that guy or something. But because of the names in the movie, you've got Paul Newman, you've got William Holden, and Steve McQueen. When you see the opening of the movie and also the credits and also the poster, the way their names are. So Steve McQueen is first, but Paul Newman is higher on the list, and then William Holden, who is, even with Steve McQueen, slightly lower with his last name. So this is a whole thing now. These people are so big now. Agents are getting involved and egos, and that's a true story. That's a real deal true story that at this point now, everybody's so big that everybody wants, top billing. Fred Astaire's in this one. Richard Chamberlain. Richard Chamberlain is Dr. Kildare. He's one of the biggest TV stars ever. And all I'm going to say is O.J. Simpson.
Simpson.
So anybody who doesn't know O.J. Simpson at this point or heard of him, well, then you just don't like movies. How about that? Forget his football career and forget his football career and anything that happened later on. Just forget that. You need to see this movie because O.J. Simpson is saving children and kittens.
Well, you also have Robert Vaughn and Robert Wagner.
Well, Robert Vaughn is the man from U.N.C.L.E., as among other things. He's in Superman 3, as our audience surely knows. And Robert Wagner is
Heart
a
to
huge
Heart.
star. He's married to Natalie Wood, and he's in Heart to Heart. So how can you not like him? He's a handsome devil.
Now, as these films progress, again, the special effects are getting better and better. The miniature photography, this particular one is a high-rise, that starts to burn down.
And again, this one you can relate to because at this point, I'm sure you were a little younger, but I'd already been watching Emergency on TV. So the Towering Inferno is just an extension of that in a way with firemen, you know what I mean? And so with this cast, and it scared the bejesus out of me a little bit because of, you know what fire is.
And I remember the big thing about this film is that, the only way they can get the fire under control is they have to blow the tanks on the roof or something.
Yeah.
So that all the water has to just cascade down the floors to kind of put the fire out. That's the final way they can do it.
What a brilliant plan, too. And the men had to strap themselves after they tried to get the ladies out, and there was some kind of chaos. And
well, they try to get them from. I think they try to get them out a window into another building, and the wind is too much, and the helicopters. People rush the helicopter and they crash or something like that. And it's everything that could go wrong goes wrong. Now, as the special effects are getting better and the stars are getting bigger, they're also, these films getting nominated for Academy Awards. And some of them are winning, not top award, not best pictures, even though they are nominated for some of them, but they're getting best special effects awards. They're getting music awards for certain songs, that are played during the movie. So they're getting recognition. These things are making money.
In the Poseidon Adventure, The Morning After, that's a real song. That's something that people know, And yeah, I think at this point, that's when things start coming together. You get a song, you get some big actors, you get a stunning locale or some dramatic special effects work.
Yeah, and in the Towering Inferno, from what I understand here, it won Oscar for Best Music Original Song. We May Never Love Like This Again. Again, this is one of those 70s songs. I'm sure you'll recognize it if you hear it.
I know you and I sing that to each other a lot.
In the shower.
When we're riding together, we wind up humming or singing a few bars.
Everybody doesn't have to know this, okay, James? Come on. Well, let's move forward to what have we, since we have not heard about any type of airport film. Hey, guess what? It's 1977. Star Wars is out. We got to have another airport movie. So we have Airport 70. It's not Airport 1977. It's Airport 77.
Now, the funny thing about this is pre-Star Wars. This is probably one of the last big movies that are pre-Star Wars. And I know we come back to it a lot. And sometimes our audience, I think they like Star Wars, but maybe they say enough with Star Wars, you guys. But the world really did change. Jaws kind of began the new era of movies, but Star Wars blew everything out of the water, and pardon the pun, because that's where this plane winds up. This is a jumbo jet 747. Again, the gimmick is somehow it winds up crashing into the water.
Oh, I'll tell you exactly how it crashes. I'll tell you exactly. Hijackers hijack a plane, and they crash, trying to, because they're stealing some art or something.
Art, yes,
and in the process, they hit a fog bank and they crash, and now the plane has a hole in it and it's starting to sink into the bottom of the ocean. But they somehow manage to not completely flood the plane, so the people are all inside as they're slowly getting, leaks and cracks are forming and this and that and the other. So they have to figure out a way of how do we rescue these guys? And we'll tell you in a minute, but let's go over a little bit of the superstars involved.
Yeah,
Number one, you have Jack Lemmon.
Jack Lemmon is huge still in the 70s. I don't know how to tell people. Jack Lemmon was a big deal. He was, many of the younger people probably know him for Glengarry Glen Ross but he was in The Odd Couple. He's one of the 12 Angry Men. This is a guy who's a serious hardcore actor.
Some guy named James Stewart. Who's James Stewart?
I'm Jimmy Stewart.
It's Jimmy Stewart. My God,
George Kennedy is back. George Kennedy
has to be in it. It's a contractual thing.
Yeah, he becomes to tie him, and he becomes the John Ratzenberger of the airplane movies.
Yeah.
He has to be in all of them.
Kolchak himself, Darren McGavin.
And he's also Ralphie's dad, so people might know him from that.
Count Dooku.
Christopher Lee. Okay. Now, these are big names, and Gil Gerard, Buck Rogers is in it.
That's my favorite one.
So anyway, there's a lot of big names. Emmett Walsh is in it. We know him from Blade Runner. And
oh my God,
there's a lot of there are characters. If you check out these movies, you're going to start notice. I don't want to call them background characters, or some of the supporting cast are people you've seen in a lot of these type of movies, in addition to their regular careers as big time actors. And some of them are TV stars, some of them are movie stars. But it seems like by now, this is a viable, huge way to either revitalize your career, start your career, or get some street cred in an action movie that perhaps maybe you're more of a dramatic or regular type of actor, and now you're in this action movie, so you've got a whole different audience, and like I said, revitalize your career.
Well, this one also has one of the most creative ways of rescuing everybody at the end, rescuing most of them. They put these inflatable bladders under the plane or around the wings, and they float the entire plane up somehow long enough for everybody to jump out to safety, or most of them jump out to safety before the whole plane kind of sinks in again or something, which is, again, for excellent special effects. It's amazing what they do.
And it works. This one actually does have a thrilling kind of dramatic finale, and you're into it. It's not a goof. It's still being taken serious at this point, even though it's starting to have the the ingredients of parody.
Well, one of the names we mentioned earlier involved in a lot of these movies is Irwin Allen. Well, in 1978, he finally is going to direct his own disaster film, and he directs The Swarm, which is a different type of disaster film. It's more of an animal, or in this particular case, an insect one. It's about killer bees, swarm of bees, killing people and whatever. And in this particular one, you have Michael Caine, another superstar of the time, being the lead actor here. Richard Widmark also.
Richard Widmark, Richard Chamberlain, Olivia de Havilland, Catherine Ross is coming up on her in her own. So again, these are big time stars. These aren't just these aren't guys. Fred MacMurray is in. I mentioned him before. He's actually in one of these movies. Now, the thing about The Swarm is, again, at this point, I'm going to movies a lot, and the thing is, they were talking about these killer bees on the news that were coming from Mexico. Now, when you're a kid, I'm 10 years old. I'm a pretty smart kid. But when you hear killer bees are coming, and if they bite you, if they sting you, you're done. And I've never been stung by a bee at that point.
Dead on the spot.
And you're dead on the spot. Like, that's it. These bees are so terrible. Now, I'm not sure. It's 2016. I'm not sure if the bees have still even gotten here at this point. But at that time, they were on their way, and nothing could stop them. So I was scared to death. And this movie comes out, and I see this, and there's bees and people and chaos, and it scared the hell out of me. And still to this day, don't like bugs because of movies like this.
Well, let me hit you with a few more superstars attached to this one. Jose Ferrer, Patty Duke, Slim Pickens, Henry Fonda, and Fred MacMurray.
Yeah, Fred MacMurray. I love My Three Sons. So Fred MacMurray, to me, is one of the biggest names.
Again, the quality of the films is starting to decline a little bit, but the quality of the stars are not. They're still pumping out these people like they're going out of style, and I guess they were kind of going out of style.
This one is more of a B movie. In hindsight, it was
it's a subgenre. It's the animal subgenre. So you can kind of throw it with Jaws or with Orca or with the big rats or the big rabbits or whatever. It's a different type of disaster film.
Yeah, it's sort of at that point you started to realize, okay, like I said, Star Wars movies have come out. Science fiction is all the rage now. You got by 78, you're into the Buck Rogers Star Trek world, Battlestar Galactica on TV. Stuff like that. So I think this was probably the beginning of the end, but there were a few more afterwards because, this was towards the end of the Irwin Allen thing because he was not going to be able to compete now with the whole new Star Wars world and those big and movies. They were throwing money towards that. Right. So guys like him,
Superman, Star Wars, Star Trek, all that stuff. Guys like him were a
little bit of the past now in the mind of new Hollywood. They were everybody's looking to, like we've talked about, everybody's looking to see, do we have anything that's a science fiction property or something that we can turn into a science fiction competition for Star Wars. And, unfortunately, the stuff that came afterwards, you got Avalanche, you got a few turkeys that creep up here and there that we don't even talk about because they're kind of cheesy. But there's just a couple of more that are near and dear to our heart. And one of them is the Beyond the Poseidon Adventure. It's the sequel to the Poseidon Adventure, which who thought you needed a sequel to the Poseidon Adventure because the boat had already sunk, supposedly.
Yeah, but it didn't blow up yet, James.
It didn't. Exactly. It didn't really sink. It's brilliant. That movie came out in 72. This is 79. So it's brilliant how they decide to do this. And Michael Caine and Telly Savalas and Sally Field are in it. Now, Sally Field's already played Frog. Telly Savalas
and Smokey
and
the Bandit. She's got the Smokey and the Bandit films.
Yeah, as Frog. And then Telly Savalas, is Kojak. He's in James Bond. And Michael Caine. So Michael Caine is a very prolific actor. But listen, in this one, they have the brilliant gimmick of there's some secret cargo nobody knew that there's one group is just a salvager group, and the other group are really, I think it was Telly's group.
They're thieves, like terrorists or something.
They're trying to get the plutonium for nefarious deeds. And
for Dr. Evil.
And it basically becomes a race for the MacGuffin, which is the nuclear material. But in this movie, you still have some pretty big names.
Well, you have Peter Boyle, which, young Frankenstein.
And he's also the dad in Raymond.
And Everybody Loves Raymond, yeah. He's the grandfather. Carl Malden, for crying out loud. That's a huge name.
On the waterfront.
And returning to the disaster film is Slim Pickens.
And Shirley Jones is in it. She's Mrs. Partridge. You've got
Angelica Cartwright.
Jack Warden. And now some of the people who are... Angela Cartwright had... Already, you know her, but now a young Mark Harmon is in it.
Harmon.
And a younger Veronica Hamill, who we've forgotten about her, but she winds up being huge on Hill Street Blues in the 80s, So to me, when I watch these movies back, it's almost like seeing, old friends sometimes, because by now we've seen them in their future. We know them from their past. Some of them have passed away, unfortunately. So this is a pretty big movie for me. It wasn't well received. It kind of was a bit of a turkey, but it's not terrible. I think anybody watching it with the Poseidon Adventure would probably get a kick out of how it all fits together.
Well, in the same year, 1979, as we're finishing off the 70s, we also have the final airport film. Now, this time they switched the name around. It's called the Concorde Airport 79. So, okay, the gimmick is it's a different plane.
Now, you were floating around between countries, but I mean, do you remember when the Concorde started out and it was a big deal?
Not as it was starting out.
It really was a big deal, this whole modern, it's like the space age times two,
Supersonic
you know what
flight,
I mean?
yeah.
Yeah, but unfortunately it was out of reach for most people, but that's what made it even more of a brilliant plan because most people would never get on this plane, so they could do almost anything with the movie. The thing is, at this point, it didn't have the cachet that the previous films had. It still had George Kennedy and some pretty big names. But at this point, you've got Charo in it. Now, Charo is already known for her coochie coochie on the Love Boat from time to time.
What is this, the Love Boat?
Yeah. So you're getting characters like that, and they're John Davidson, so he's kind of like, I mean, he's a good guy, but he's kind of like a TV actor. You know, you think of him. J.J. Walker. There's more people on it who we know, but the cast just isn't as big. It's respected. It's just not as big names. These people have either moved on to bigger movies, if you can believe that, or they've retired. You know, at this point, some of these people are not as big in Hollywood. They're older or they've passed away. So to me, this one's not like a lot of repeat viewings. What do you think?
Yeah, this is really, the storyline is being beaten to death. At this point, the plane has to land in the Alps or something, and it has to perform an emergency landing. And
yeah, it's a little ridiculous.
It's not very creative, and like the Russians almost shoot it down, and it's kind of very convoluted. They try to make it kind of political too, so it's kind of like the most interesting thing about the whole movie is the fact that it's the Concorde. So you get to see a pretty new plane, but the story is kind of like,
Yeah, they try to tie in the Olympics, which unfortunately, like the Moscow Olympics turned into a political thing too, because the Americans wound up, boycotting them and stuff like that. And so the whole thing doesn't really hold up now because it didn't really have a strong story back then, so this isn't like an all-time classic.
Now, as we kind of finish up the list here, winding down on it, one last film I want to add is Meteor, which is what you would consider to be a pretty heavy sci-fi type of film, and it kind of falls under the disaster film because of what happens as a result of a giant meteor or little pieces of meteors or whatever, which is kind of reminiscent of some of the more future disaster films that we'll talk about in a different episode.
Now, do you remember this being featured in Starlog and them showing the miniatures of Hong Kong and some other things of the tidal wave?
Well, yeah, because of the special effects and because of the fact that you have Sean Connery starring in it, a lot of heads are turning going, ooh, wait a minute, this must be interesting. And you said it earlier, the Star Wars influence.
Sean Connery now, post James Bond, post some of his other 70s epics. So Sean Connery, people love Sean Connery still, even though he's not James Bond at this point. And so that's a big name.
Well, you also have Natalie Wood, big name at the time.
And Henry Fonda and Trevor Howard, these are big-time actors.
Carl Malden again, Brian Keith, Martin Landau. Wow.
Martin Landau is basically... he's not as well known. He's pretty well known from the Mission Impossible, and then he Space 1999.
And Space 1999.
He hadn't quite come on to his Oscar-winning performance yet.
No, not yet.
Bela Lugosi.
Ed Wood.
Yeah, but there's still some other people that we know. Bibi Besh is in it. She winds up playing Kirk's mistress in Star Trek II, among other roles she's in. And, it's not a classic, but it's entertaining enough because of the sci-fi element, the Sean Connery, and the special effects. I'm surprised this is something they haven't tried to remake, even though they got close to it with, like you said, movies like Armageddon.
And Deep Impact probably kind of taps into a lot of this, because in this particular film, a chunk of a meteor is heading towards Earth. And again, they get a little political. So what happens is the Russians and the Americans agree to use their nuclear missiles that are in space. It's a little, SDI, a technology before its time, to kind of knock out this meteor, to blow it up. But in the process of blowing it up, a lot of little parts fall. And then you get a lot of the disaster, the Earth disaster, buildings on fire, floods, and this and that because of, the collateral damage of everything raining, the meteor shower raining on Earth. So you get a little bit of that.
I would say this is close to the end and really the finale of, even though the 70s are over. The really of this era of disaster movies ended with a movie called When Time Ran Out. And it's ironic because it's almost like time ran out for the disaster genre, because now we're
For the genre.
by 1980 we're full force into sci-fi, Star Wars, that kind of stuff. We're getting into the era of Scorsese and Spielberg and that kind of stuff. So I say this is basically the end. But it's a weak movie, but they go out at a bang in the sense that they jam this movie with Paul Newman, Jacqueline Bisset, William Holden, Ernest Borgnine shows up again, James Franciscus, he's from Planet of the Apes. So it's not a turkey in terms of the cast. It's just there's nothing left in the tank. They tried. And I recall seeing this one on HBO a few years after, probably maybe by 1982 or so. This is on HBO, and they showed it a lot. And I probably would never watch it again. You know what I mean? Even with Paul Newman in it, I'd probably seen it. I don't need to see it again.
Well, from what I've been reading here, they have a little note that the only reason Paul Newman did it was because he was under contract and he had to do this Irwin Allen film, and he said he wouldn't do any more afterwards.
Yeah, it was basically that at that point after this, Paul Newman, as if he needed to change his career up, but he did, and that's when he got into movies that were huge, like The Verdict and The Color of Money, and that kind of stuff, and then entering into his later years. But like you said, he probably just did it because they told him he had to, and, there you go. That's how a genre ends, with forcing a guy to make a movie under contract.
Right. Again, these are genres, and genres come and go, and they return sometimes. And this was, like you said, this is pretty much the end of that 70s wave of disaster movies. The wave comes back many years later. I would say probably in the mid to late 90s into the early 2000s.
Yeah, would you say like the Roland Emmerich kind of era?
Definitely.
Kick it back into gear. Yeah, there are a ton of movies.
Yeah,
that type of stuff. That's like middle 90s-ish and stuff. And that just kicks open a whole new version of what we're talking about with high-tech special effects. Again, big-name stars. And now, these were now like the tentpole type movies, as they like to call them. It starts a whole new era.
Right. And some of them become hits and some of them don't. But that is a story for another day.
We could go on and on.
as we usually do. But anyway, I want to thank James for joining me today on this disaster movie special, classic disaster movie special. And I want to thank you guys for listening, and we will see you here soon here at GeekFest Rants. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Steve McQueen and Paul Newman race against time as one tiny spark becomes a night of blazing suspense. The Towering Inferno.
It's out of control. And it's coming your way.
Warner Brothers and 20th Century Fox present Irwin Allen's production of The Towering Inferno. Steve McQueen, Paul Newman, William Holden, Faye Dunaway, Fred Astaire, Susan Blakely, Richard Chamberlain, Jennifer Jones, O.J. Simpson, Robert Vaughn, and Robert Wagner. The Towering Inferno.
Those people are going to die up there if something's not done. I want you out of here.
So you can stop worrying about me. What about me down there worrying about you?
I'll never let you go anywhere without me again. I'll be back with the whole fire department.
The Towering Inferno.
Set me down on the scenic elevator.
Now, the producer of the Poseidon Adventure brings you more spectacle, more stars, more suspense than you've ever seen in one motion picture. Steve McQueen is the fire chief. Paul Newman is the architect. Step by step, floor by floor, this is a race against time to save hundreds of people trapped in a night of blazing suspense as the world's tallest building becomes the Towering Inferno. Towering Inferno.
Young, strapping Eric Estrada.
Who's James Stewart?
O.J. Simpson is saving children and kittens. Her coochie coochie